Well, welcome back, everybody. It is we're back. It was fun with Holly tonight earlier on Bigfoot Body Talk. If you missed that, go back and give it a look. It was pretty entertaining as far as where women fitness has gone, where it's come from, and where it's going to continue to go. The theme for tonight. Hey, Joey. Joey came back. Welcome back, Joey. So, people know that I've had. Well, first, let's, welcome everybody as they come in. And I'll take a deep breath here, relax a minute. Couple things I want to bring up, because we have a couple stories that I'm going to read tonight, but at the same time, we should have a couple things to look at on the screen besides me reading. I mean, if we want to talk about Bigfoot, you have to, I mentioned earlier, there's good and bad. The universe has balance. Same thing with Bigfoot. There's good ones, there's bad ones, and there's everything in between. So let us find. Then there's some fake stuff too. People that like to fake. Everybody wants their claim to fame. Like this image here. As it pulls up, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Kairubo Tadale, welcome. I believe you. Keep up your good work, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Linda Thompson's back. Joey, we should get together soon, brother, in the woods or something soon. Excuse me. I agree. If anything with these health concerns, I've definitely come to realize that I need to quit procrastinating and get some stuff done, things I want to do. Getting together with you and going out and checking out some woods would be great. I would love to see some of the areas you're talking about, and there would also be some pretty cool stuff depending on where we meet at. I mean, we're lucky we live in Michigan because it is just full of places we can go and see things. And I mean, it's a phenomenal place to be. Oops. It's a phenomenal environment for them. The history goes back even farther than the Dogman. But the one thing, and maybe you've heard of something, Joy, I haven't really heard any really nasty ones in Michigan. I mean, I've been blessed not to have any nasty ones. I've heard a nasty Dogman in Michigan, that's for sure, but I've never had the problem of hearing about a Bigfoot who's gone ballistic for some reason and hunters disappearing or anything like that. Here, like Washington and California, Appalachian Mountains, they might be guilty of one or two. I wonder if the big Michigan big ones are just a little more laid back, kind of like people in the UP, where they just think that's them and that's okay. Let's put a Bigfoot track up. Something to look at besides me. So now imagine something like that living in your yard, coming back. And Joey, me either. It could be more laid back. Yeah, so far so good. I mean, I hope we don't hear of anything incredibly nasty. happening to them. Let's see. Got a new setup, folks. We got a couple things going. So the show is steadily going to get better and better. We're going to be able to talk about more stuff. Be able to take a look at some of these crazy TikTok videos that are out there, like some of these that are actually behind the tent. We'll leave this guy up here. Ohio Bigfoot researcher, how we doing? Thank you for joining me. I know it's a Friday night. It's the last Friday before Christmas. Switching back and forth from Mary and Chris's page. Oh, well, hey, no worries. I'm just glad you're in here. Glad you guys joined me on a Friday night, last one before Christmas. Hopefully you guys have got your shopping done. It's only going to get more hectic from here. You know, and speaking of hectic, being the Bigfoot channel that we are, Ohio Bigfoot research is still kicking. That's, hey, you know what? Haven't heard from Marion in a little bit. I hope they are okay. Oh, Mary, I was thinking you're talking about Mary and Grizzly. I think they're doing okay. I think they're visiting Grizzly's family. So, you know, they're pretty hectic. They got a lot of stuff in the works. There's going to be some announcements coming up, which are pretty exciting. I can't say anything yet, but really good stuff. I'm going to give a little shameless plug. If you haven't watched it yet, go check out Small Town Monsters, Rise of the Dogman. It's in Michigan, and they actually took a family encounter that I talked about and put it in the movie. So that's kind of cool. So, yeah, as people on here have heard, and if you haven't heard, there's plenty of my stories on the playlist. You can go check them out. My experiences, you know, I've had some sketchy ones that to me were sketchy at the time, but I don't look back and ever think I was. This one with this guy looking here, you know, you can see that massive cranial head, massive arm on him. This was the time where if I was in danger, this would have been it. And long story short, we came across an area that we believe was kind of like a playpen. There were a couple of babies in there. My friend saw the babies. I didn't, but you could hear them sound the alarm with the tree knocks and then whistle. And then we got responding tree knocks and whistles from multiple directions, and they got very close very quickly. Joey, that's a very cool pic. Where at? This is by the Manistee River. So we went to go check this out, and somebody had told my friend, my mentor, and he told me about it, was that there's an island in the middle, and where it's fairly shallow. They were midnight fishing, and so they, you know, had a lantern on the boat, spotlight, and they heard a splash, write it off as a fish because that's what they're out doing, is fishing. And nice, maybe we can meet somewhere out there. Yeah, absolutely. This place here has been active for about 2 decades that I know of, and this was just taken last year. So very active. There's family groups out there. But we got between that big guy, another black big guy that was even thicker than the one you're looking at on the screen, and then a smaller female. And this was the one time where I was really worried that we had crossed the line, and Dave Paulides might be talking about us on the 411. So, but speaking of, that was the sketchiest one for me. There are, however, other ones out there. Amy, that is a cool pic. Thank you. Yeah, big boys and girls. So, and thanks for being that show, Amy and Linda, earlier. So we had sketchy ones, but nothing like we're about to talk about tonight. This is where some things get really sketchy, and it makes you wonder when Bigfoot, get ready to cross a line. What drives them to it? Is it just because of people invading their space? Is it because of maybe some have had bad encounters with other humans? So maybe there is a prejudice there. If they're as smart as we think we are, and if we want to tie human emotions to them, there could be prejudice. There could be some maybe revenge, maybe just wanting to be left alone. The whole "don't make me angry, you wouldn't like me when I'm angry." Judging from the size of the guy in that pic, I didn't want to make him angry. So the first one I'm going to talk about is one I was just recently had been hearing about. It's a newer article, but it is about an older event, but not too old, because the one I tend to give this quite a bit of credibility in my eyes, because love them or hate them, the BFRO does get involved in this. So why don't we talk about it? So this is basically what's called the Siege of Hanobia, and it happened in Oklahoma. And I'm basically just going to read this and stop and make sure we stay up on chat. If you guys have questions as we go, we can answer them. So the story begins with the Humphrey family, who lived on large property surrounded by forest. The family consisted of Tim Humphrey, his brother Mike, and Tim's wife and children. They initially noticed that their deer meat supply was disappearing, and it wasn't long before they realized that something unusual was going on. One night, Tim was awakened by banging on the door. Assuming it was a dream, he went back to sleep, only to be woken up again by tapping on the windows. This time he saw hairy creatures peering in at him and his family. The creatures were described as having lips curling back in an animalistic manner, showing their teeth, and even growling at the family. So at this point, the Bigfoot are already upset for some reason. And understandably, the Humphreys were frightened and concerned for their safety. Tim decided to take action. He grabbed his rifle, intending to shoot one of the creatures. He managed to hit it once in the head, once in the back, and a third shot he believed was a long shot. To me, this already spells a disaster. Jeff Yarrington, Milkman, how we doing? Siege of Hanobia, baby. This is what we're going to talk about tonight. So, they've already wounded one. Managed to hit it. However, as the creature passed away, several more of its kind appeared in the woods surrounding the men. One of the creatures picked up the deceased Sasquatch and slung it over his shoulder before disappearing into the forest. The situation escalated, with creatures becoming more aggressive and more violent. They began turning doorknobs and pulling at windows, trying to get inside the house. Tim made the decision to move his wife and children to a safer location, while he and his brother stayed behind to deal with the situation. Jeff's awesome. I just picked up some pizza. Oh man, if you say you got meat lovers, I'm gonna die right here. So I'd be really curious to know what got these. Was it just the deer that got them riled up? Were they wanting more? Or why these Sasquatch are getting geared up? The fact that now they've offed one, sausage and pineapple. Oh, you lost me, man. Enjoy. All right, Chad, let's there's a few of us here, and why don't we comment? Pizza, does pineapple actually belong on pizza, or are we now eating a type of Hawaiian pita? When was the encounter from? I believe this happened in the 80s. We're gonna have to find a couple articles on this one. This one's short. But anyway, so the Humphreys for safety, just attacked. Situation escalated, with creatures becoming more aggressive and more violent. They began turning doorknobs and pulling at windows, trying to get inside the house. Tim decided to move his wife and children while he and his brother stayed behind to deal with the situation. Yeah, media lovers. The brothers set up lights and cameras, hoping to capture evidence of the Sasquatch. However, the creatures seemed to ignore the lights and continue their attempts to enter the property. Tim and Mike recognized that the Sasquatch were intelligent and seemed to understand human behavior, but they didn't have the level of intelligence to reason that you could simply break the windows or the doors. Siege of Shinobi is fascinating. An account of Sasquatch elusive nature interaction with humans. The story is certainly intriguing. It's good to remember Sasquatch are not animals nor beasts, but rather elusive, intelligent creatures that deserve our respect. Let us find another one, because these things really, when they say amp it up, they're not kidding. Because they actually... So this was 2000. This was not the 80s. I take that back. Here's an article, 2000, 2016, 16 years ago, the winter was harsh. The family lived on a 2-story cabin, 30 acres of dense woods in Hoyt-Nobia. Yeah, this one's a little more in-depth. So the hungry predators began to target the fresh meat living inside the cabin. Creepy things came back along, jiggling doorknobs. They say the wintering woods surrounding the cabin echoed with screams and strange chattering and thrashing of trees. With each terrifying night, the predators grew more ferocious in their attempts to break into the cabin. Jeff, they didn't break into the shed and steal the meat. They did notice the meat was disappearing. I'm trying to figure out if they were maybe reaching through a window or what they were trying to do. Jeff, I normally do meat lovers, but I changed it up. All right, we're still in good graces. We're still buds. The family became more convinced these were not bears. The mother and children fled. The deer hunter and his friends loaded assault rifles and waited on the porch. They'd had enough. The story goes they didn't have to wait long. The man shot a massive red-eyed monster prowling at 100 yards. They heard screams of pain for all of the rest of the night. The woods seethed at the southern edge of the expansive Ochata forest, churned and would noisy until daybreak. No one slept. Good save. Yeah, exactly. So they've offed one and took it into the woods. Now all their buddies are screaming at them. Townspeople searched the woods the next day, following a trail of blood to a leafy bedding of a massive being. They found rudimentary attempts at first aid, bits of brain matter, more blood. The injured predator was gone, though. One of the state volunteer investigators with the BFRO arrived on the scene within 16 hours of the shooting. The official report filed at the BFR's online database concluded the blood trail led to a rifle-shot deer, not an injured Bigfoot. The Okies were nervous and riled up as the woods were. They fired assault weapons into the winter dark at the slightest flash of growling red or movement beyond the timberline. The BFRO investigators, keen on preserving and observing Bigfoot life, politely disagreed with their shoot first and then find the body method. That's because they're not living there. I bet their whole attitude would change. And if I remember right, maybe it'll talk about it, but apparently 2 of them BFRO members went and stayed. As soon as the crap hit the fan, they shagged butt. They didn't even hang around for the rest of the results. So, but it worked. The mischief and screams around the cabin slowed. Weeks later, the menacing hilltop hollering ended for good. 16 years later, and a mile away from the besieged cabin, Enthusiasts and experts now gather the first weekend in October for the annual Hanobia Bigfoot Festival and Conference. The Tulsa Voice sent a crack investigation group to the Hanobia Festival held at the Comanche Mountains. A worthwhile 3 to 4 hour half-hour drive, sorry. The day after we arrived, we approached a man in black overalls. He rode into the middle of our cruise site at the outermost edge of Christ's 40 acres and cut the engine and said, "Are you all trying to get abducted by Bigfoot?" he asked, exasperated. "You trying to become his love slave?" Took off his camel baseball hat, shook the sweat from his head. Noontime sun in the southern Oklahoma is still very warm in October. We were bright sun and confident, and about a dying breakfast fire, cavalier after a skillet of scrambled eggs and bacon, and we hadn't heard the Siege of Hanobia tale around the campfire yet. The man in the overalls revved his ATV, tossed us a suit yourself smirk, and rode down the grassy ravine and back to the safety of the center of the camp. It was true, we had pitched our Bigfoot stomp from the wildwoods, once rolling with angry predators and a nervous rifle to get up close with personal with an Okie Mountain monster legend. And that break, barbecue chicken from Marco's is one of my favorite. All their chicken wings are awesome. The Bigfoot in Arkansas and eastern Oklahoma are meaner than most states. I wonder why that is. All this pizza food talk is making me hungry, fellas. Yeah, I know. All I had was a bowl of chili and cheese and some sour cream. But pizza sounds really good. So what do we think triggered this? Let's see what happened while these guys were 16 years later and they're now camping near the famous site. It's a great weekend to be alive in Scotch country, but in the morning, women in the communal bathrooms in between toweling off kitchen, brushing their teeth. Did you experience anything last night? One woman said she heard grunts. We heard nothing but insects, so we packed a whiskey-filled flask and a rocky, dry creek bed trail map with painted yellow wooden frozen feet. We tripped down stones with a forest of elm, pine, and walnut trees spun with cottony bag worm nests. Another group of squatchers were throwing out Bigfoot calls to attract a real deal. We returned the call, belly out, full force. 30 seconds later, another yowl bellowed across the copperhead-ridden river water. A few birds took flight. We called again, no response. After turning up empty-footed, we checked into the conference on Saturday. Let's see. You can take a picture of your legs, said a church lady sitting in a cabin card table full of a journal box. We did. Here's a roster, TV notes. So it sounds like they had a little action there. But my question is, what tipped those Sasquatch off? Was it the food source? Was it because of the fact that there were other predators that were getting involved? Was it the fact that they cut off the food source? If I remember right, I remember them getting ready to buy this 30 acres, and the guy had it on sale for an amazing price. And they wouldn't, but they weren't warned. But what they said when they were walking the property, they felt like they were being watched and just kind of wrote it off as to being in a new place and things like that. So, and then they bought the house, moved in, started stocking up on deer, and that's when things started to get crazy. So there's all kinds of videos on it. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of articles. But if this has piqued your interest, let's see here. Love me some Julie loves good chili. Most like deer meat was running out and ran out, and they want more. And that's what I'm thinking is once they figured out there was a food source and somebody else was willing to go get the deer for them, with cheddar cheese and can't forget the sour. You got to have the sour cream in that chili. I don't know what it is. It's a magical combination that the Lord has blessed us with. I'm gonna have to text my friend who is in Arkansas and ask her if she has had any mean encounters. I would love to hear about it if she did. So there's the first one for the evening that doesn't go well. This one's a pretty well circulated one. One of my favorites because it does sound so plausible. We will breeze through it because, like I said, a lot of people have probably heard this, but it's still one of my favorite, where a Bigfoot for some reason decides, I don't know if you call it go rogue, but get a little friendlier than they should with people. So this is called the Cowman of Copalis Beach. And this one, to me, when you hear about what this creature does, reminds me more of the big fella peeking from behind the tree there. My dad worked in the timber industry his whole life. His father was a logger. He grew up in and around the woods. My dad started his own logging company when he was 18 and has owned and operated shake and shingle mills from the Oregon clear up to Thorn Bay, Alaska. He's an intelligent man, holds over a dozen patents for various pieces of equipment he has designed and built over the years. He has employed dozens of people over the years, all of them spending extensive time in the wilderness. When I was a boy, I remember hearing bits and pieces of conversations among some of the men at the mill. Although nobody would tell me directly, I understood that something had gone on before I was born. It involved one of the foremen, John. They weren't joking around. They were generally afraid and wouldn't talk about it with a kid. When I was young, my dad wouldn't tell me about it because I would often go in the woods cutting blocks with him on the weekends, and he would want me to feel afraid in the woods. While I was speaking with him last weekend, I told him a couple strange events that happened to me later in the wilderness, and that reminded me of the hints at a story I heard when I was a boy. After some prying, he told me the following story. In the mid-1960s, my dad owns a large roofing product mill in Aberdeen, Washington. He had teams of men that would cut the fallen old-growth cedar salvage left after a logging operation. He had permits to salvage a large amount of wood in the coastal area of Grays Harbor County, primarily in the area around Copalis Beach. Several of the men cutting on his crews lived in and around Copalis Beach. His foreman, a man I will call John for the story, was a bright, down-to-earth hard worker. My dad trusted him with thousands of dollars of vehicles and equipment, as well as the safety of crews. He was not the kind of man to make up stories. On Monday morning, sometime in July, John was several hours late for work. This was highly unusual, as he's always there early, getting the saws and the trucks ready for the day. My dad said he was visibly shaken up, and when I asked him what was wrong, he asked my dad to go to the office so others wouldn't hear him. They went in and sat down. John simply said, something destroyed our house this weekend. My dad thought he had said someone broke into the house and asked John if he knew who the someone was. John said, you don't understand. This wasn't a person. It was I don't know what it was, but it completely trashed the house. The family's going to stay with my brother in Elma for a while. My dad asked him to explain what happened. John said when he got home from work Friday evening, his youngest son, Tim, who was around 4 at the time, told him he saw a big cowman walking on the edge of their field that afternoon. Ohio Bigfoot researchers. The U.S. Army had a war with the red-haired Bigfoot in Arkansas and Oklahoma in the 1800s. Oh, and I think it was 1885. I'm not sure if the year was right. So there could be some hard feelings, and maybe that's why they're a little meaner there. So my dad asked him to explain, and Tim had seen a big cowman walking at the edge of the field that afternoon. He thought he meant a cowboy because of the neighbors wore cowboy hats, and when they were out in the sun, he asked him if he was wearing a cowboy hat. The boy said, "No, Daddy, he was a cowman, furry and stinky like the cows." He asked his wife if she knew what he was talking about, and said Tim was playing on the porch that afternoon. When he came running in, said the cowman was stuck on the fence. He was very excited, so she went out to see what he was talking about. She said as she opened the door, she was hit by a horrible smell, like wet dogs and garbage. Tim was pointing across the opposite field of their house and said, "He got loose." She looked where he was gesturing and could see the top strand of the barbed wire bouncing up and down as somebody had just pulled on it really hard and let it go. She didn't see the cowman and noticed nothing out of the ordinary except for the smell. She told Tim to come inside and play for the rest of the day. She felt uneasy and a little scared. Their older son, John Jr., who was 12 at the time, went to a friend's house and walked home a short while after Tim saw his cowman. He told her somebody had followed him home, walking in the woods off to the right side of the road. He never saw who it was. They never left the woods. But he said it had to be a really big man. He could hear the large sticks cracking, and the footsteps were very heavy. Once he got to the driveway of their house where the wood stopped at the field where his brother and had his sighting, the footsteps stopped, and John Jr. never saw anything. He was pretty shaken up by the event, wanted his dad to go to the woods and check it out with him. Amy's for a cowman. Later that evening, John strapped his 357 and took his older son out into the field to have a look. They walked into the area where the cowman was supposedly stuck on the fence and walked down the fence line looking for anything. They came upon a large clump of long, reddish-brown hair tangled in the top strand of the barbed wire. He tried to pull it off, but it was really tangled up. So he pulled out his buck knife and sawed it off. He said the hair was over a foot long, real coarse, very stringy, and there appeared to be a bed of flesh matted into the clump. And the top wire was pulled loose from one of the posts. Whatever was hung up on that fence was very big. He handed the hair to his son to hold, and they climbed the fence and walked toward the woods. He said that looking for any sign of tracks on the ground. The hair looked like it was from a horse's mane or tail. The ground was solid grassy field. There were no hoof prints or any tracks he could find. The edge of the woods began about 10 feet from the fence line, and they entered on a small game trail that deer frequented. It was about 8 at night, and in the woods it was getting fairly dark. They walked for a ways and soon began to smell of rotting garbage and wet dog odor his wife had reported earlier. John said he got the feeling he was being watched. The hair on the back of his neck was standing up. He told his son they should head back before it got dark, and the boy didn't argue. And they began walking back out. Then they could hear heavy footsteps off to their left. They stopped, and the footsteps stopped. They walked on nearly to the clearing, and John whispered to his son, "Run like hell to the house on the count of 3. John Jr. nodded. John whispered 1, 2, 3, and gave his son a shove in the back to get him started, then spun around and raced off in the woods in the opposite direction toward the footsteps with his gun drawn. Off the trail in the underbrush was dense with ferns and bushes. He had a hard time making headway, but as he got closer, he could hear it moving away from him, deeper in the woods. At this time, he told my dad that he thought it was a vagrant camping out in the woods and possibly scoping houses out to rob that night. John was a big man, capable of taking care of himself in almost any situation, and he had a large caliber handgun, so he wasn't too worried. He was a few yards off the trail in deep brush when he heard the movement stop just ahead of him. He stopped, looked, listened, and he thought he saw some movement by a large tree, like somebody was trying to hide. He leveled his gun and said, "Come out, nice and slow, or I swear to God I'll blow you back to wherever you came from and shoot you." It was a silent moment. and then he caught movement out of the corner of his eye and spun around to his right for a better look. He said it moved like a huge bear through the brush. He could only see bits of it through the dense ferns, but it was moving quietly from the tree on the four legs. It was about 15 feet away from him. At first, he thought it was a bear, and then suddenly he saw a huge, hairy arm with a human-like hand reach out and grab the smaller alder tree. The tree was about 4 inches in diameter, and it grabbed hold about 5 feet up. He said it happened so fast with a blur, the thing pulled itself upright out of the brush by holding the tree. It stood on 2 legs, turned its upper body to glare at John. It was enormous. He couldn't believe how bulky it was. He said it was over 7 feet tall and at least half that big through the chest. It was too dark to make out many features, but its eyes seemed to glow a deep red, and he could see the teeth, like it was curling its lips back. It stood just for a brief moment, and then it lunged ahead, pushing on the tree with tremendous force. The tree snapped loudly and crashed into the trees on the ground. Getting hung up in the branches and not falling to the ground, it then soon disappeared into the brush with frightening speed, sounding like a bulldozer with no engine sounds. John just stood there in shock, his gun temporarily forgotten. Then he realized it was heading toward the house, the way his son had went. He turned, ran to the trail, hoping to gain ground on it and cut it off before it reached the clearing. He hit the trail and ran as fast as he could toward that clearing, all the while hearing the creature thrash through the brush on his side. He burst into the clearing and looked frantically for his son. John Jr. was standing inside of the fenced field, waiting for his dad. John screamed at him to run to the house. Then he stopped. The thing came crashing out of the woods about 50 feet to his left. It crossed the 10-foot clearing and stepped over the fence in 2 strides. It was running through the field parallel to his son, and in a matter of seconds, John screamed at his son, "Run faster," and took aim at the creature. He didn't fire. He was afraid to hit his son or his house, so he vaulted over the fence and ran in pursuit of them. He could see it angling toward his son, and he knew there was no way he would make it to the gate before it cut him off. In desperation, he pointed the gun to the ground and fired as he ran, hoping to scare it. It veered more sharply toward his son and put on an enormous burst of speed. He heard his boy scream as they seemed to collide. He saw the creature dip its shoulder down a little bit, and suddenly John Jr. was airborne. He flew about 10 feet before hitting the ground and rolling. The creature never paused. It continued to run at an amazing speed in the loop back towards the woods. Once the line of fire was clear, John stopped and squeezed off the 5 remaining rounds at the retreating creature. He was pretty sure all the shots went wild. The creature never made a sound or even slowed down, and he was soon over the fence and back in the woods. He reached his son, who was shaken up, physically not hurt. He asked his dad if it was a bear. Apparently, little John was so busy running to the house, he didn't see the creature running after him. He said something big and black suddenly ran into him, and he felt a huge paw hit his bottom, and he said he felt like he was falling. John pulled his son to his feet, ran to the gate, locking the door behind him. They were both out of breath and white as ghosts. His wife was screaming at him, demanding to know what those gunshots were for, and if they were all right. When he could catch his breath, he began to make sure the back door was locked. He was going to call the sheriff. He went to go to the phone and began to the number. And this was before 911. Then stopped and wondered what exactly he was going to say. Hung up the phone, realizing what an idiot he would look like if he told the sheriff the boogeyman just chased him out of the woods. He told his wife it was a large animal, possibly a bear. He didn't even know how to begin to tell that the 4-year-old was right. His Cowman was real, and it was more frightening than anything he could have imagined. He told him to keep all the doors locked and stay away from the windows. Around 10 that night, both boys were in bed, and John and his wife sat down to watch the news. They soon heard a loud, moaning cry, like the siren of a volunteer fire department. It would stretch out for a long time and ended with a whoop, whoop sound. It was coming from the woods opposite of the house. His wife asked, "What the heck was that?" John answered truthfully, "That's Tim's Cowman." Then described her the full details what happened. She immediately wanted to call the sheriff, and he persuaded her they would sound crazy. He would handle it himself. She reluctantly agreed, told him she didn't want either of the kids outside until that thing was gone. The howling went on until around midnight when it got quiet again. John wanted to stay up through the night and watch over the house, but he'd had a long day at work, and the excitement earlier that night had worn him out. He went to bed around 1 in the morning with no further problems that night. They slept in the morning. The boys were already up watching cartoons when they got out of bed. The first thing little John said was that he had heard the bear rubbing up against the house last night. He said he was too scared to get up and tell his parents and fell back asleep soon after. Saturday morning cartoons, remember those, folks? Those were the days. Then Tim said, "The Cowman talks funny." This stopped John cold. He asked his son, "When did you talk to the Cowman?" Tim replied, "Oh, last night, in my room." John asked, "The Cowman was in your room?" "No, Daddy, he's too big for my room. He talked through my window." Tim said he turned to the cartoons. "What did the Cowman say, Tim?" John asked. "He talks funny." "I don't know what he said. He talks like this. Ooh, ah, 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 ooh," Tim said, and started making strange monkey noises. "Did the Cowman try to get in your window?" John asked, breaking out in a cold sweat. "He's too big for that. He made funny faces, and he has Lincoln log teeth," Tim said with a smile. John later learned that Tim had meant square teeth the same size as the small blocks in the Lincoln log set. It was apparently spent quite a while talking and made faces outside the boy's window. Tim said it lay down and went to sleep outside, and he could hear it snoring. John walked to his younger son's room cautiously and peered out the window. No sleeping Cowman. John told the boys to get dressed. They were going to visit their uncle in Elmo for the day. After his wife and kids left, he called one of his crew and asked him to come over. I'll call him Patrick. Said he was an ex-state patrolman, and my dad said he was kicked off the force because of his drinking problem. He was a good worker, never got drunk before dark, so John figured they would have the most of the day to look for this thing. When Patrick arrived, John greeted him at the door. "Are you up for some hunting?" Seeing how it's not hunting season, Patrick told him he doesn't poach and doesn't even want to know about it if John did. John told him it wasn't a deer he was after, and went on to explain the previous night's events. Patrick didn't believe him. He could see he was sincere and still shook up. John had his pistol and a bolt-action 30-06. Patrick had a 38 in his car, and John loaned him a 12-gauge. They first circled the house looking for any signs of a nocturnal visitor. At the back of the house, there was a spigot for the garden hose, and it always leaked. There was a patch of ground-worn bare of the grass under it, and it turned into mud. In the center of the mud, there was a huge, clear imprint of what looked like a bare human foot. John said it was at least 18 inches long, very wide. It was so clear he got the feeling that it was left there on purpose. They found no other prints around the house, and in places in the field and woods where a track could be made, the creature seemed to have avoided them. Off to the side of the track in the mud were 4 straight lines about 8 inches long. He said it looked like someone had raked their fingers through the mud when they circled around the house and got to Tim's window. And then they saw what for. Amy's Lincoln log teeth, yeah. And the story gets creepier and creepier, don't it, Amy? So it dragged its fingers through the mud, and then they saw what for. Above the top of the window, a good 7 feet up, were 4 muddy streaks, and on the window itself were dozens of large muddy fingerprints. The glass wasn't cracked or broken, just smeared with mud. By this time, Patrick was fast becoming convinced something strange indeed happened the night before. Before going into the woods, John wanted to feed the family pigs. They had 2 of them, apparently fairly young, weighing about 40 pounds each. The pig pen was 100 yards away from the house, behind an old barn. As they got closer, John became concerned because they couldn't hear him making any noise. Usually when they rounded the corner, they squealed like crazy because they knew food was near at hand, but this morning was completely silent. The road to the corner and the pen rounded the corner, and the pen was empty. No sign of damage or struggle. Pigs were just gone. They searched the barn but found nothing out of place, so they decided to hit the woods and try to end this thing. Joy, this was nightmare fuel, Joy. They entered on the same trail John and John Jr. had used the day before. John showed Patrick the broken fence wire and told him again about the hair. It was a bright summer morning, and John was surprised at the difference from the previous evening. The night before had been still and silent. Now the woods were alive, and birds and small animals. He showed Patrick the broken tree. They followed the creature's trail and found several more trees and large branches twisted and broken. They could see large, faint impressions of footprints where the ground was soft. They followed the deer trail further into the woods and encountered nothing unusual. By noon, they were both getting hungry, so they hiked back to the house for lunch. Spent the rest of the day poking around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just before dark that night, his wife and kids drove up. He and Patrick were sitting on the porch with their guns, watching the woods. His wife asked if he had seen anything. John told her about the footprint and the mud on the window. Patrick had retrieved a pint of booze from his car and was well on his way to getting smashed. John decided he didn't want a frightened drunk with a gun around his family, so he suggested that Patrick go home. Nothing's going to happen anyway. Patrick agreed and rode off. John continued to watch the woods. His wife brought out a plate of food and a Coleman lantern and a flashlight. He told her he would stay out here and watch the house through the night. Before they went to bed, he went into their bedroom and, with help from his wife, pushed the king-size bed as far from the window as they possibly could. They agreed the wife and kids would all sleep in the bed for the night and keep watch around the house. She had grown up hunting and knew how to handle a gun as good as him. She insisted on keeping the shotty in the room with them. He agreed, after making her promise to ask for a name before firing anything. If it replied John, please don't fire at it. There was a full moon that night, and John could see across the field into the inky dark of the woods. The night air was filled with the sound of thousands of crickets, and the pond behind the house was full of croaking frogs. As the moon rose higher, clumps of weeds in the field began casting sinister shadows. And long before John was seeing big hairy creatures sneaking up on him in each and every shadow. Stood up, lit a cigarette, trying to shake the fear, concentrate on the task at hand. He smoked as he wandered to the end of the porch and stared, looking into the darkened barn. Something was different, but he couldn't quite place it. Front of the barn facing the house was open. Moonlight was hitting it from the side, casting the interior in deep shadows. He stood watching the black opening and finished his smoke, thinking about the missing pigs. He then realized what was wrong. All the crickets and frogs had gone silent. It was quiet inside. As he turned to walk back to his chair, thought he saw movement in the barn. He looked intently and could make out nothing, then turned his head a bit to the side and saw what looked like two red eyes hovering about 8 foot off the ground. Couldn't see them if he looked straight at him, but when he averted his eyes a little, they became clearer. They were deep coal red, almost invisible in the dark. Every few seconds, they would disappear when the creature blinked. He left the porch and began slowly working his way toward the barn, taking his time, building up his courage, and he got closer and still see no movement. It had gone further back into the dark. He got within 20 feet of the opening, and his flashlight would now penetrate the gloom in the box. He moved the feeble beam over the light. Old tractor, pickup, boxes, buckets, too many places to hide, even something big. He made his way clear to the rear of the barn without seeing anything, and then slowly turned around to leave. He felt relieved not to have encountered it in the dark barn, frightened and somewhat confused about where it could have gone. As he was walking, he glanced at the wide stairs leading to the hayloft and froze. He knew with complete certainty that it had climbed those stairs and was waiting for him to walk out under the hayloft, just to jump down on him. He swore he could hear the floorboards creaking and pounding in his ears, and he was unable to act or move. Suddenly, there was a booming explosion of a shotgun from the house, followed by his wife screaming. His paralysis broke, and he bolted out of the barn toward the house. As he ran toward the house, he heard an inhuman roar. See, I'm getting goosebumps already with these. It sounded ticked off and in pain. It screamed again and heard branches breaking. He got to the house and almost knocked down the front of the door in his hurry to get inside. He ran down the hall to their room and found the family huddled together on the bed, sobbing. One of the windows was blown out, and his wife was still pointing the shoddy at it. When he burst into the room, she swung it in his direction and screamed, and he hit the floor. He waited for the blast, but it didn't come. He slowly stood up, and she had put it down. He went to the bed and asked her what happened. She was all shook up, trying to answer. Tim started crying. Why did you shoot the cowman, Mommy? Why? John Jr. had his face buried in her shoulder, crying. After they calmed down, he told him to follow them, led him to the living room, opened the door, looked around carefully, told him to come out in the car and put chamas, piled them in the car, and drove them to his brother's house in Alma. They made a movie about this? Really? Oh, I didn't know that. I want to see this movie. Oh, yeah, I'd be brown pants moment for sure. So on the way there, he calmed down enough to tell him what happened. And she said she had been there a few hours, dozed off. She was awakened by Tim talking to someone and this bizarre clicking, chirping sound. Tim wasn't in bed. He was standing in front of the windows. The moonlight was shining through the windows, illuminating the room pretty well. But there was a large shadow like a tree obscuring the window in front of Tim. Mommy, listen, the cowman can sound like a bird, Tim said, pointing excitedly at the dark figure in the window. Timmy, get away from the window, she said, trying to keep her voice quiet. Right after she spoke, the noises outside changed. They went from chirping to a strange gibbering, almost like human speech with an occasional pig-like snort. This time John woke up and said, "What's that?" rather loudly, and that seemed to incite the creature, and it hit the side of the house with its fist hard enough for the walls to tremble. At this, Little John screamed and yelled, "Quiet, you're going to scare him away." She yelled to Tim to get away from the window and reached up to the headboard and grabbed the shoddy. She got out of bed, stared toward Tim. The creature leaned down and looked straight in the window at her. She screamed and raised a shoddy, afraid to shoot because her son was so close. She started forward to grab Tim. Then there was an explosion of breaking glass. A gigantic, hairy arm reached through the window toward her son. She screamed again and fired over Tim's head, blowing out the rest of the window and hitting the creature with double lock shut. It jerked back out of the window and disappeared. A few seconds later, she heard it screaming in the woods. It was trying to get Tim. It was trying to grab my baby. She started crying again and comforted as best she could. They stayed the rest of the night at his brother's. They went back Monday morning before work to get their belongings. And you realize he had left the door open. He's afraid the animals would get in. When they arrived, they looked like a tornado had gone through it. The couch was upside down. They had a large, heavy console TV. It was apparently thrown across the room, laying in a spray of broken glass. The kitchen was trashed. The refrigerator was knocked over and food everywhere. So obviously this thing wasn't hungry. This was mad. The doors to both of the boys' bedroom were left closed. The rooms were untouched, same as the bathroom. The master bedroom was torn apart, pillows ripped up, feathers everywhere. Chest of drawers was knocked over and a large mirror smashed. John's brother looked around in awe and said, "You better call the police." And John said, "What? Tell them Bigfoot destroyed my house?" They left and closed the door and drove to my dad's mill in Albin. John's brother waited in the car. They drove back to the house. John showed my dad the damage. He pulled a clump of hair from his shirt pocket and let my dad look at it. Walking away and surveying the damage, Dad pointed out the cracks in the ceiling where it had apparently stood up and hit his head. John told my dad that they couldn't live there anymore. Even if the creature was gone, they would always be afraid. Their homeowner's insurance wouldn't cover the damage. The adjuster claimed John must have done it in a drunken rage. My dad helped them find a place in Aberdeen and gave them a loan for the new furniture, and the house was eventually fixed up and sold. My dad never heard another problem there. So that Bigfoot had it in for one family. In closing, things to think about. Yeah, what's the name of the movie? I want to watch too. Me too. So what set it off? Was this a case of possibly a mama Bigfoot that maybe lost her youngling, maybe lost her baby and saw Timmy as a possible replacement? So that's why it took a liking to Tim and even went to the extreme of obviously risking bodily harm. and taking it when trying to reach through the window to grab him. So not all Bigfoot are cute and cuddly, and we don't know what's going to happen with them, folks. On that note, we got to wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming on and listening to me talk about two of my favorite encounters. And I would like all of you to have a Merry Christmas, because remember, it's that time of year. No matter what grievances we have, we can put them aside for a little while and just sit back, enjoy your family, enjoy life, because it's too short. And I'm pretty sure I will see you after Christmas. So with that, like, comment, and if you guys have any ideas of something you want to hear about or something maybe I can look into, leave a comment. Let me know. Hit me up on Facebook Messenger. You guys all know I'm easy to find and love talking to you guys. You guys are why I do this. So, thank you, Amy and Joey and Linda and everybody in the chat. You guys have a fantastic holiday. And from coast to coast around the world, peace and love. We're out.